we began with some consideration of the ongoing and apparently perennial mystery of the Rosicrucians last week. The reason I use those adjectives is because it doesn't seem that the mystery about their beginning, their end, or their very existence has never been clarified since the first Rosicrucian manifestos were published in Calw, which is now the state of Baden-Württemberg. I think at that time it was only Württemberg, and it was assumed that their author was the Lutheran dean of the church in Calw at that time, and we mentioned his name before, but he never really owned up to it, and never did really anybody discover as to who and where these mysterious Rosicrucians were. Now, there have been revival movements, as we mentioned, and some undoubtedly more effective than others. For many years, there was probably the biggest Rosicrucian movement. Actually, the two large Rosicrucian revival movements were both based in California, obviously, whereas, California, the state of the strange people. I won't use the gardener's expression, California, the land of fruits and nuts. So I won't use that, and you probably shouldn't use it yourself. In any event, the largest one, who was probably the most successful revival movement, I mentioned it last time, was what went under the acronym AMORC, Ancient Mystical Order Rosicrucis, and was located, its headquarters located in San Jose. I think it's still there, although the activity has declined somewhat in recent years. And the other, closer to us in Oceanside, California, the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which was founded by a gentleman by the name of Max Heindl, at least that was his nom de plume. His secular name was von Graashofen. He was from Denmark. He was a Danish-German gentleman. I would say that if I have not met either of them because they had both gone to the Rosicrucian division of heaven by the time I got here. But I would say that from everything that I read in his not so very voluminous writings of Max Heindl, I preferred his approach to the mysteries of the Rosy Cross to those of Ralph Lewis, who was the founding imperator of Amorc. But that is really not of great significance. In any event, the Rosicrucian activity has declined, let's say, in recent years, both here and elsewhere. There is yet another Rosicrucian body that is functioning in public in Europe, and that has the Latin title of Lectorium, which is reading library, Lectorium Rosicrucianum, and its founder was a Dutch gentleman who was very interested not only in the Rosy Cross but in the mystery of the Cathars in the south of France, and who established this organization, which also has a very nice building and office in Calw. That is sort of the mystical headquarters of that part of Germany. So if you ever go that way, you should go. It's a lovely, lovely little town, and there are all kinds of interesting places surrounding it, and it's really worth going there. In modern times, it is the birthplace of the Nobel Prize-winning great author Hermann Hesse, among others, whom of course most of us know with his books, which became very popular in the 60s, and he was apparently also very, very interesting gentleman. So anyway, between all of these, let's say I chose clear back in Europe as my principal avenue of insight and of information into the esoteric tradition, the tradition of the theosophy of H.P. Blavatsky, and as a result of that I joined this lodge right in the early 50s, have been a member of it ever since, and so our next talk will be on Blavatsky and the occult revival of the 19th century, which is really, I think, of much greater importance than most people think, because it became so important and popular, and at times controversial. There was so much publicity for better than a century about theosophy, both in Asia with their Indian headquarters, both in Europe with others, and here in America, that even today most people, individual teachers or groups that are engaged in teaching the esoteric tradition are really inspired and informed by the theosophy that Blavatsky brought into the picture, into the open in 1875, and which was subsequently championed and made famous by the greatest woman orator of the 19th and the 20th century, Dr. Annie Besant, after whom our lodge here is named, and her photograph is a large picture, so when you get up you can look at it there. So let's say that's what we'll devote ourselves to next time. But now we need to lead up to it, and we just sort of touched the mystery of the Rosicrucians last time, and we can continue with that at this particular point. So let's say the Rosicrucian mythos, which is a good name, because when you use the English word myth, which is after all the translation, then a lot of people whose knowledge of the intricacies of the English language are not known to them, we foreigners are the ones who learn those, you know. Would interpret a myth as one particular radio host used that expression to the great Joseph Campbell when he was interviewing it, and said to me, I heard this story from Campbell himself, well, Mr. Campbell, why are you so interested in myth? Everybody knows that a myth is a lie. So Joseph said, what am I going to answer to something like this? So I didn't answer anything. I just went on with my program. He said, in any event, that is the sort of the journalistic jargon over myth is something that is not true. But on the other hand, of course, when it may be better to use the Greek word mythos, which is the original word, and which really originally in Greek meant a story, a tale. And if you have been in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean, you may have come across the phenomenon that very often when you ask somebody a question, especially a question about a more involved matter, you know, then they will say, to answer you, I'm going to tell you a story. and then they tell you a story. Sometimes the story is interesting, sometimes you wish that they hadn't told it. But that was really the method of communication very often, and it has significant advantages over other definitions, let us say. In any event, bringing up all of this, at the time of at the time of the great turbulence that was starting in Europe as the result of the Protestant Reformation and the dissolution of so many monasteries, the manner in which particularly the German princes absconded with all the beautiful churches and made them Lutheran because they unanswered to them. So let's say it was a difficult period, especially in the religious sense. And right when that was happening, and had pretty well happened already, then there appeared, as we had mentioned last time, I'm not going to repeat myself, I hope, there came on successive years the publication of the so-called Rosicrucian manifestos. And one of these told the story of the fraternity, the secret order of the Rosy Cross, and the other one told much about the never verified, probably largely fictitious story of its founder, whose German name was Christian Rosenkreuz, which just means Christian Rosy Cross, and then on other somewhat more involved and complicated alchemical treatise of the mystical marriage of Christian Rosenkreuz. It has several titles. So these, some of these were written in Latin, some of them were written in German, indicating that it originated in the German language country, but that undoubtedly its author was also a learned person. Now, as we indicated at that time, this was such a critical time period in religious equal spiritual terms in Europe, because the Roman Catholic Church has been driven out from a lot of the countries where it was the only church up to that time. Even the great country of France, which way back from the time of the Gauls was called the oldest daughter of the Christian Church, because the Gauls were one of the first big block of people who converted. So even in France, even in Germany, or various places now, the Protestant Reformation, as it is called, it probably would be more correct to call it revolution, religious revolution took place, and this has left various great holes in the psyche of the European peoples. And the most important, at least for our purposes, of our discussion, is that what happened was that practically all emphasis upon and interest in and study of Christian mysticism, which was very extensive by then, went by the wayside. Because while Martin Luther, who was really the most sympathetic of the two great reformers, if you like Calvin's character, after reading about it, then there's something wrong with your judgment. But no, Luther was a lot better. In any event, while Luther himself was according to some judgment of historians, a sort of a mystic. And because this was, I think, the judgment that was rendered by the great Gnostic scholar of Holland, Gilles Quispel, who was a good friend of ours, and he came here several times to lecture for us. He said that the Protestant Reformation had taken away such gnosis from the early Christian times that was still around and made something else out of it. Because the Protestant Reformation was, we might say with some justification, was a manifestation, to use the Jungian psychological term, primarily of the thinking function. You have a book, the Bible, and then from there came the Latin phrase, sola scriptura. We go only by the scripture. And yet, by going sola scriptura, the Protestant sects, which now run into the thousands in the world, came up with such weird interpretations of the Bible that they're really something else. So here is the thing. You only go by the scripture, but then you turn it and twist it and do things with it as you please. Well, that's the way religious history is very often. But let's say, up to that time, if somebody was interested in the ever deeper side of religion, which is always there, but even if you are I don't know, a Hottentot or somebody from the Samoan Islands or somewhere within your practice and your teachings, there is always something mystical. There are prophetic figures, there are imaginative figures, maybe also some outright liars, but people who come up with unusual experiences, unusual information which they put forth. And we might say that that is the mysticism of every religion. Personal spiritual experience, usually within the mythos of the larger religious framework, but of interest and import and having a transformative effect on the experiencer, and often becoming the origin of a school or an assembly of religious people who are inspired by that experience. And but with the coming of the Protestant Reformation and with their exceedingly powerful emphasis on mental concepts, you see, something just came to my mind, which is probably very daring and very stupid at the same time, but why not? Namely, that when you take, let's say, take three religions: the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, and maybe Buddhism or something like that. So in the Jewish religion is a religion. Yes, it is a religion of the book. It is the law, and it is, let's say, a doctrine with a great deal of emphasis on ethical and moral laws, which has been passed on. So it's very much of a religion that looks at your actions. So let's say we say Judaism action, Christianity, I would say in its higher aspect, mysticism, in its lower aspect, a following of rules. which doesn't appeal to me right there. Already as a child, I didn't like to be told what to do and what not to do, and I still don't. In any event, that's just a merely personal matter. But let us say, and then when it comes to the Protestant religions, pretty much all of them, the emphasis is in the salvific, allegedly salvific effect of concepts, of ideas. And so it's, of course there are statements in biblical scripture that might indicate that, for instance, that St. Paul, I think, writes, whom we used to quote in Latin, sola fides justificat. Only the faith, the belief, justifies. But they usually forget that added to that, the apostle also said, only fides justificat, sed fides autem operibus mortua est. But the faith without deeds is dead. So if you just believe and don't do anything that one is supposed to do, then you killed the whole deal. Now then, anyway, what all of this has to do with the Rosicrucians, I don't know, but but there was some idea to that effect in my mind to begin with. So what it really was, that rather suddenly, and especially in the wake of the 30 Years' War, which was probably a greater disaster for Europe, I don't mean other countries, but for Europe, than the First and the Second World War put together. The slaughter of people, the devastation of the countryside, both even of the fields, the hunger and all kinds of terrible things, pestilences that followed it. It was absolutely terrible condition, and as its name indicates, it lasted at least 30 years, if not longer. Now then, so this, in the wake of the 30 Years' War, and the virtual disappearance of the transcendental, the mystical orientation that again, according to Jung, would address itself to the transcendent function and not only the sensation and feeling and thinking or even intuition. So that became a great problem. Because I think this also Jung said that once, that one of the great philosophers, and it may have been St. Thomas Aquinas, said, Homo religiosus. I am on my Latin kick today. The human is religious. In other words, every human, no matter where they are, no matter what their tradition, no matter how they come up, do have a religious instinct. There is, after all, religio means to join together, to join back. And if we are halfway deep thinkers at all, and if we give some consideration of the issues and the problems of our lives, then sooner or later we come up with the notion that that something is not right. C.G. Jung came up with the answer to that what is not right with us, that we are not whole, we are not put together, we are partial, we act out of, and we are motivated by complexes, as he called it. And that's where all these things of this kind of a complex, that kind of a complex came about. And of course with Sigmund Freud, the great secret motivator behind everything is the dreaded notion of sex. But in any event, there are all of these motivations. But I think when we study the story, the teachings and the history of religions, we will find that there is yet another step, and that other step is personal, individual, spiritual experience, which usually occurs within the context of a larger religious framework of some beliefs and some commandments, but stands on its own. And this is where, when we study this aspect of religions, then almost any place we look in the world, we will find people, usually within a religious context, who experience and at times seem to be working themselves what we often call miracles. In other words, the mystical life calls into existence unusual happenings, unusual acts, and unusual events. And we mentioned last time from a book that my friend has graciously lent me, which is written by a British, he teaches in a British institution of higher learning, although his name sounds to me like he may be of Spanish descent, although that doesn't matter, who wrote a book called They Flew. And it describes, often in great detail and with very, very critical and yet very accurate historical vision, the numerous, really many experiences, usually of Christian mystics who subsequently were made saints, of defying the law of gravity. Now, I look back to my spiritual ancestors, the Gnostics, and I remember that some Valentinians said that one of the curses of the demiurge that we experience here in this world is what? Is gravity. So when we are more spiritual or spirited, then this does not become so unusual, and probably also redounds in various ways to our benefit, as it had to people like Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Anthony Cupertino, and many other great flying saints. Maybe some of you at some point in your, after all we are in Hollywood, may have seen a very charming movie that was called The Reluctant Saint. The chief protagonist in it was Maximilian Schell. And this was based on the life of is it Joseph Cupertino? Yeah, not Anthony. Of Saint Joseph Cupertino, an Italian monk of the Capuchin order, who was filled with mystical experiences, and the physical results of these were with increasing frequency in his life that he rose up into the air and flew. Sometimes he flew considerable distances. Didn't have to worry about the airline cancellations or any of those things. He just went up into the air and flew. And of course many others as well. So let's say and of course we don't need to tell that in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Eastern religion, the heart of the religious practice is totally mystical. If there were no mysticism in Hinduism, there would be no Hinduism. If there were no mysticism in Buddhism, there would be no Buddhism. Because that is, I think, as these people correctly have discerned, that is the heart and soul of every religion. If there is no mysticism, no personal contact with transcendence, then, at least in my not so humble opinion, then what is this all about? What's it all about, Alfie? You know, why are we going to church? Why are we going to a retreat center? Why do we learn meditation? Why do we have a rosary and so forth? Why? Because the homo mysticus, the mystical man is coming out and says, look, I want to know. I want to have contact with these great, wonderful forms of consciousness and deities and forces and angels. I want to be there among them. I want to know that with gnosis. And when that does not obtain, then no, you got to believe and you got to do or don't do. So it's a belief system and a system of commandments. Well, to some of us that was never enough, and ever since the beginning of the world. And these are the kind of people we are talking about now. In every civilization, in every historical period, there are people with such needs. It's like I think a biblical phrase is probably from one of the Psalms that like the deer is thirsty for the water in the fountain, so I thirst for my God. So it's a need. And this need, the mystical need in some people is stronger than in others. It's obscured by various things, other preoccupations. It's obscured by stupid school teachers in our culture who think that, atheism or whatever the euphemisms for that are, such as secularism, is the way, and therefore they will suppress as much as possible the mystical longing in people. Yet, I, at least, on the basis of a lifetime of dealing with religious matters and the teaching of the doctrines and the practices of various religions in school, I have just definitely come to the conclusion that in addition to various things, in addition to intellect, in addition to ideation, in addition to this, that, and the other thing, the human being is also naturally a mystic. It can be suppressed, it can be forgotten about, but it is there. And that is why sometimes, the great story, which of course some of the evangelical sects emphasize greatly, that sometimes the recognition comes on people, as allegedly it came on the Apostle Paul. Boom, there it is. There is the God. There it is, the real thing. And I have to go after it and do something with it. Sometimes it slowly grows in the individual. There are all kinds of ways in which the mystical urge, shall we say, asserts itself in the human. But the important thing is not how it comes to you. The important thing is that it is there and it comes to you. And if you are at all psycho-spiritually open to that sort of thing, then sooner or later in your life, when you are a small child, when you are an adolescent, when you are an adult, when you are in your dotage, like myself, it will come to you. And of course, how could it, under the circumstances when now the guardians of the religion, the preachers, the ministers, at that time in Germany primarily of the Lutheran faith, did not cultivate that at all. They did not teach that at all. So the mystical desire, the urge for the transcendental. We might even say, if we don't mind that term in the secular age, the urge, the desire for God asserts itself. If you are not told about the greater spiritual life, if you are not told about soul and spirit and God and angel or so, some things along that line are going to come to you. You can lock yourself up in an attic room somewhere and live on vegan food, or some other off-putting horror of that description. And then somehow, not as the result of the vegan food, but somehow in the course of that activity, you will begin to have experiences which under another cultural matrix would have been called mystical. Now, I think that we have enough of beating on that horse, and so let's say one of the most portentous and long-lasting rumors, phenomena that came out of this deprivation of the people in the mystical in wake of the Protestant Reformation was the strange mystery of the Rosicrucians. Somehow these three treatises, and some of it is really very engaging. The story of Christian Rosenkreuz himself, how he goes out into the Middle East and what now would be called Morocco, and there he meets this mysterious wise men. From this it was deduced that perhaps the origin at the back of the Rosicrucians may have been Sufi Islam, which is quite possible. And maybe it's not even, from an esoteric point of view, it's not even veridical, it's not really true to say Sufi Islam. Nowadays they consider that. I remember an interview that I had, a long one, hours, with the head of one of the major Sufi organizations in the world, Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan, the head of the Western Sufi order. They are Chishtiya, I think. In any event, and he said to me, between you and me, my friend, we are not really Muslims. We Sufis have always been here. And when the Prophet Muhammad came and all the great political power, the only way that we survived was that we made a deal with the Muslims, that we are going to call ourselves Muslims, we are going to go to the mosque, but we have never been that, and that's not what we are. Now, Pir Vilayat has gone to the Muslim heaven. I don't know how many virgins come your way there. Well, 70, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. That's from a hadith, or that's not a Sufi teaching. So, in any event, he cannot be assailed any longer by the fanatics, because he wouldn't be here to respond to the fanaticism. But I believe him, because there are mystical traditions in this world which probably have been here since the time of the shamans, since the time of the primitive, maybe since the time of the Neanderthal man. We don't know. I mean, the Neanderthal people probably are as capable of mystical and spiritual experiences as others. In any event, there has always been a drive for that, and often that drive was successful, and then people had experiences of extraordinary realities which religion usually concerns itself with. Now, so the quest, the drive, the burning desire for this mystical dimension of life came forth in the wake of the Reformation. All right, now we don't have any more saints. We are not supposed to have any visions, and all that sort of thing. But you know what? We would like some of these things. We have known people who did, and it's not without. Or how should I put it? It's not a happenstance that this Rosicrucian revival started in the Black Forest area, very near the Black Forest. In fact, we went from there. The family I was staying with, we went from there to branches of the Black Forest and were picking mushrooms. But since none of us were terribly well informed in mushroom lore, when we brought it back, we went to an old woman. It's always an old woman, you know. An old woman says, "Look, Mother Mary or whatever, you sort out from these mushrooms as to what is edible, because we know that there's lots of poison mushrooms." So she went through our mushrooms and she threw away about 80% of them. But there was still enough for us to have a nice mushroom feast. So in any event, why did I bring up the mushrooms? Well, of course, people who have partaken certain kinds of mushrooms often had mystical or quasi-mystical experiences, so it's not entirely, out of the picture. But let us say, but it's just because of that. The Black Forest and the whole area around it, the state of Württemberg, that is the most occult, the most mystical, and the most weird place that I have ever been in. And I've been in some strange ones. I know how to create my own, for that matter. I know how to make things weirder than they are. This is one of my great talents. You should recognize that. Why? Because the weird is the holy. The holy is the weird. As Alan Watts said, that what did you see? No, it tripped me. But he had a very good saying: "Everyone is entitled to his own kind of weird." This was Alan's motto. And he certainly was entitled to his, and he exercised it. But I think it's a very good, because then we don't condemn people so easily. Oh, they are stupid because they believe that. Well, who knows? Maybe they're smarter than you are. Maybe they have experienced something that you haven't, that you should still experience yourself. And so in this kind of a mode, that is an occult country. And the Black Forest, I assure you, is really black. Not in the sense of being evil or something, but it's a huge forest with great big old trees, and they're planted close together and they drew together, so when you look at it from a little distance even, it all looks black. Wow. It's the Schwarze Wald, the Black Forest. So in any event, to this day, the people there, the people who lived there told me, oh, that is a fortune teller over there. Oh, this one reads palms. Oh, that one reads cards. She pointing to all the houses in Calf and around Calf. I thought to myself, well, I can see why Johann Valentin Andrea wrote his Rosicrucian mystical books, because that's what these people are interested in here. Even if you read Hermann Hesse, you read Damien. I mean, that Damien is full of mystical experiences, you know. In any event, so it is understandable that in that part of Germany, maybe one of the most mystical parts of Germany, should have arisen the first news about the Rosicrucians. At the same time, the French occult schools, and particularly one representative, mentioned him last time, Maurice Marger, who was a great modern poet, I think in the 1920s. When you go up the path on the mountain of Montségur, the sacred Qatar mountain, there is a plaque to Maurice Marger for having called attention to the Qatar martyrs in his poems. Wonderful writer. In any event, Maurice Marger he didn't even put it forth as a suggestion, but he had, I think I may have mentioned last time, he had a doctrine that he taught, that Christian Rosenkreuz was, of course that's a nom de plume, that's a pseudonym, but Christian Rosenkreuz was from a family who were originally Catars in the Languedoc. And that when the Catars were exterminated in such an efficient manner by the unholy Inquisition, then one family managed to escape France, as it became then. And they came to Germany. And they became, they conquered, it was a knightly family, or in some way established themselves in the Black Forest area, and they got the German name of von Görmishausen. And there is a noble family to this day in Germany, or the Görmishausens, and inasmuch as, everybody meets in Hollywood. If they don't come to Hollywood, then they don't exist, So we had a family, Görmishausen, who lived in the most beautiful house up the road. That castle is somewhere else. That's in my home country. But in any event, this is sort of castle-like Hollywood structure with towers on it and everything. It's in wood. I think it's been a long time that I have been there, but I think it's on Woodhaven Drive, which goes up when Beechwood turns radically left and goes up the mountain. In any event, so Görmishausens were still there. And I confronted Mr. Görmishausen, was a very nice man. Have you ever heard this rumor that Maurice Marger wrote about? Oh, he said about the family, and he laughed. He said, well, I wouldn't deny it. So that was, particularly in the French occult circles, that was an explanation as to who Christian Rosenkreuz was. And then he apparently had an inspiration that he should start a group of people who are going to be devoted to the mystical, to the esoteric life, and this would carry forward the alternative mystical tradition, which has pretty well gone away with the coming of the Protestant Reformation. Now, lest you'll brand me as a Catholic bigot, which is interesting for a Gnostic to be, but let me tell you that this kind of idea that out of the, as Maurice Marger writes it beautifully, that when the great Albigensian forest was burned down, in the Inquisition, the pyres of the Inquisition, there were still a few trees that escaped and they lived. And one of those trees was brought to Germany and became the family tree of the Görmishausen, and I don't doubt it. Because even this gentleman, he must be dead now, Sir Alvin Görmishausen was this gentleman here. He he was a member of one of the knightly orders. In any event, it is indicated that this is something that was quite often considered as a strong possibility for the person of Christian Rosenkreuz, and that he apparently had one of these great symbols of, he apparently had a vision of the cross and the rose. And from that he developed the Rosicrucian mythos. Now, I kind of went for a long time last time, and I don't want to chase you away, but let us say, obviously, in all mystical life, in all mystical associations, one of the principal methods of insight, of transcendental learning, is symbolism. Going clear back to the Greeks, through the symbols you are led to the gods. Because the symbolon is something that is put together by a higher force and then shown you for your instruction. At least that was some of the ancient Greeks' belief. Now, therefore, apparently here was a German knight, possibly of Languedocian provenance, who had probably, now I'm conjecturing, but who probably had one big initial mystical experience which showed him a cross, and upon a cross a rose. But of course some people, even the Protestants, claim that perhaps others, maybe even including Martin Luther, had some insight into this symbolism. Because Luther, in one of his prayers, I think, writes, I'm trying to, does anybody here speak German? My German people are all gone, so I'm not going to repeat it in German. But anyway, it's a saying that Luther reproduced, and he said, the Christian heart, the Christian heart is among the blooming roses, even when there are thorns, but it is among the roses. So obviously a poetic figure, but with his rather poetic translation of the Bible, the Luther Bible, he certainly was also quite poetic in inclination. So this is then, let's say, a likelihood that perhaps, every one of these occult groups, maybe even the Theosophical Society will claim that there is a sort of a forerunner, that there are other people who taught the same thing or practiced the same things, that we are not, we haven't just fallen into the world like an apple in the Garden of Paradise, but that there is something that goes before. And so it's really quite possible that the mystical symbols of the connection of the rose and the cross were of importance, and that somebody knew about it already. Now, when I first heard about the Rosicrucians, the Rosicrucians that you cannot find no matter where you go, in any event, I said, oh, cross and the rose. So it very quickly acted upon me as a symbol that the rose is the the divine spirit inside of the human. The roses also are also the messenger of heaven like Jesus Christ. But the rose is in turn crucified. The rose is on the cross. The cross is the cross of materiality. The rose is the Rosa Mystica, the symbol of the spirit. And that satisfied me right there. I said, well, if these guys knew it or not, but they did work with a very beautiful symbol. And you know, flowers within a spiritual context and within a religious context are very numerous throughout the world. Everybody knows in Buddhism and even to some extent in Hinduism of the lotus. Of course, the lotus is the sacred flower. And the lotus, the Buddhists, of course, have an explanation for everything, because it's a very verbal religion. They will give you an explanation whether it's true or not. But in any one of them being that the rose, not the lotus, exemplifies all the elements of the world. It starts in the mud, the roots are in the mud, there is the element earth. It swims in the water, there is the element of water. And then when it opens up, the element of air, and it has the fire of the gods in it when it goes up. So that's the lotus. And the various spiritual traditions have flowers that they consider of great importance for religious or spiritual purposes. And I believe that there could be proof offered that the rose, as the mystical flower of the West, also has its history, and that it was considered probably of great spiritual and yet historical importance. The rose comes up, if you study heraldry, I have a few books on heraldry, look at my own coat of arms and then wish that I was still back in the times when that meant something. But in any event, the rose plays a very great role in Western heraldry, heraldry of the Western culture. So it was, and then it takes on various orientations. For instance, the rose is also quite a prominent symbol in alchemy. Rosa alchemica, and Rosa Mystica. For instance, just one example. I'm familiar with it because it's a Hungarian saint, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, who was of the first royal house, the original royal house of Hungary. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, but she was the daughter of a Hungarian king. And so she married a German, interestingly enough, a German prince somewhere, and went off there. And she was of a very charitable disposition, and she was always collecting from the servants food items to take out into the city to the poor people. So one time she was marching along, and her dress was, she picked up her, maybe it's not a dress, but so it's an apron, because the dresses had their own aprons too at that time. So she hid this big mass of bread and bakeries, baked goods in that apron, and was walking in the city with her retainer. So along came a spy who was spying for her husband, who didn't like her do these things, and so that it was reported. but when she came back, she still had bread there. And then I think her husband or so came up. Let's see what you are carrying in that apron. So she opened it up, and all the bread in it changed to roses.
No, that's beautiful.
And she was, of course, she was not aware of that. It was a miracle. Oh, So and then of course the prayer beads, which the Christians really I must admit that the Christians really learned from the Muslims in Spain. The Saint Dominic, whom I don't very much like otherwise, Dominic, even the song is stupid. But in any event, Saint Dominic then designed a prayer system for Christians, and it became the Rosary. So there are little stones or made out of wood or whatever that are roses, and they are arranged in the shape of roses, and they are arranged in a certain sequence. So many Hail Marys, so many Our Fathers, so many Glory be to the Father and the Son. And this is the origin of the Christian Rosary. It undoubtedly was copied from Muslim sources, but it's also interesting that the individual constituents of the Rosary should be the rose. And so the rose appears in various ways in hagiology and so forth. However, our time is moving along with us, so let me move from there. Let's see. So. Yeah. So the Rosicrucian mythos, as mystical and as mysterious as it is, with its symbols, particularly its symbols of the rose and the cross, was compatible both with Catholic mysticism and with Protestant mysticism. Why? Because the rose, in a biblical sense, stands for Jesus, who is crucified. And the blood of the rose is the blood of the Savior. So there are all kinds of symbolic meanings that are present there. And so we might say that the Protestant mysticism was compatible both with some of the symbolism and with all the things that came later. So now, let's say, we find ourselves in the time when the Rosicrucian manifestos were circulating, both in German and in Latin, in Germany and in other places as well. And so there were people interested in unusual and transcendental and mystical things in other countries too. But they could read about the Rosicrucians, they could fantasize about the Rosicrucians, but they didn't find any Rosicrucians. They went all over the place. So now, however, another group of people in another country became interested in the notion of a secret brotherhood. So let's say the archetype of the secret brotherhood of people desirous of wisdom and occult things and miracles and so forth, forming an association. So as the Brethren of the Rosy Cross. Just the idea in itself became a sort of a archetype. And this is credible for the following reason. It is credible because up to that time, all over the place you had monasteries. Monasteries. England had so many monasteries that if that rascally king Henry VIII hadn't come along, yes, if Henry hadn't come along, England or the British Isles would have become the European Tibet. There's almost no doubt about it. But you know, when something good is developing, then the adversary always also steps in and does something. So you would say, it's not that I believe in a person or devil, but let's say his bad spirits did haunt King Henry Tudor, and they did away with the monasteries. And to this end, then of course there was a great persecution of Catholics in general. That's why if you go to England and visit some of the nice old country houses and so forth, you will find strange little walled-off closets and things, and they are called priest holes. Yeah. That's where the people who remained Catholic and they wanted a priest, a chaplain in the house, they would hide them there, and they would brick them off. They would close them off so they couldn't be seen, because if the presence of the priest in the house was discerned by the authorities, then off with your head. So let us say, however, prior to that time, the archetype of the brotherhood, of people coming together for prayer, coming together for meditation, coming together for ritual, this is a powerful archetype. I was raised in a monastic setting as a small boy myself. I know there is something about a well-run monastery that is really inspiring and beautiful and altogether wonderful. There's no doubt about it. I think it's a wonderful psycho-spiritual experience to be there. And as late as in the 1970s, when I was in Belgium, and there I visited one of the abbeys, the Abbey of Valdieu, which is in the Wallonie, and I was received by the abbot. I told him where I came from and my background, things like that, and they practically invited me at that time. Well, you know, if you ever want to reconsider and come back, and just come him and we'll make you one of our monks. And they said, well, thank you so very much, but I didn't do it. And I think I wasn't supposed to do it, even though it would have been certain, especially if you saw that place. If you ever go to Belgium, this is northeast of Liège, which is the capital of the Wallonie, and very close to the what do they call that forest where the terrible big battle took place even in World War II?
Waterloo?
No, that's not that. Anyway, there is a very wild mountain range that goes from Belgium there up into Germany. And that was the last stand of Hitler's panzers.
Oh, the Ardennes.
Yeah. And, well, you know, one of the difficulties of old age. But you know, this was a very famous battle with the American tanks.
Bulge, also known
the battle of that is the Belgian Bulge. That's what it is. The Belgian Bulge is not a big belly of a Belgian person, but that's right. The Bulge. You're right. See, some people know everything, and other people have known something but forget it. So that's how that goes. In any event, so let's say the monastic life was done away with, And so sort of an important spiritual archetype was taken out of the culture. And so whoever Christian Rosenkreuz and his associates, if he had any, was, he wanted to re-establish the brotherhood. And this would have been the secret brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. Now, whether that is also mythological or to what extent is something that we cannot do. But in any event, now, quite independently, I have a little time, quite independently of the mythical and mysterious fraternity of the Rosicrucians, which was, most people assumed was somewhere in Germany, there was something else developing, and this was developing mostly in the British Isles. And that was and is Masonry, or Freemasonry, as it is called. He says again, the idea of the secret brotherhood, the idea of people coming together and doing something where they won't let outside people in, and where they might attain to insights and learning and spiritual vision among themselves. So how the origins of the Masonic fraternity came about is also a mystery, although it has its own mythos, which goes clear back to biblical times, to a biblical figure called Hiram Abiff, and so forth. But let us say there developed gradually a secret brotherhood, which in its own story of itself claimed that it started out with people who were builders of buildings, builders of the cathedrals, builders of castles, and so forth, and that therefore they were masons, that they were stone masons and builders. And now here you had a number of people coming together, having also their own ways, their own rituals, their own passwords. The one thing that one is tempted to say is that it was an early labor union, because the labor unions, I think, are patterned on something of that sort, but obviously more. And as it developed, only for a long time only in England, it took on various mystical and occult and symbolic qualities. And this became the Masonic order. Now the English were always big travelers. The English were the original tourists. We saw them everywhere in Austria and places like that. Anyway, being the great travelers, they undoubtedly got wind of the Rosicrucians in Germany. And so there came about a strange kind of friendly relationship, and ultimately a kind of symbiosis of the Rosicrucian tradition and the Freemasonic tradition. Now, the only thing that I need to throw in, because these are, you don't come here to listen to history. You can find history in a lot of places, including this book that I'm nowadays recommending to everyone. Excellent book. But let us say the secret brotherhoods found each other, and they began to sort of cross-fertilize. But this took centuries. And so before too long, the Rosicrucian myth, the Rosicrucian story, the Rosicrucian symbolism had entered Freemasonry. Now the Masonic rituals and the Masonic art and things of that sort are not publicized because admission to them is secret, and so one doesn't talk about them. But let's say before too long, there developed such an interest in Rosicrucianism, because the Masons, the English Masons said, well, in Germany they have these Rosicrucians, and that's a secret brotherhood. They must be doing some things that we are doing, or we should seek contact with them. And they kept this up, and by the time a century or so passed, there was a no, I'm just regaling you again with history, but this is very important. There was such an interest in the Rosicrucian lore. There was, as far as I can see, and I tried to read a lot of the literature, nothing really concrete, nothing really, the only thing really concrete that was there to the end were the three or four Rosicrucian manifestos, that was all. But people were convinced that somewhere there were the Rosicrucians, and that they knew something, and that they were wise, and that they were philosophers, and maybe they were alchemists and things of that sort. And so what happened? In an already existing secret brotherhood of that of the Freemasonry, or as in France they call them, in France they are not called Freemasons, they are called Franc-Maçons, Frankish Masons. See, the French has to have everything French. So, in any event, the Masonry was, well, we should seek contact with the Rosicrucians, and we should study the Rosicrucian symbolism and integrate this into our symbolic studies and rituals in Freemasonry. And so they formed, the Latin title again, the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, the Rosicrucian Society in England, which were all initiated Masons and who had a specialized interest in the Rosy Cross. And now we are in the middle and the latter part of the 19th century. The Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia eventually metamorphosed under theosophical influence, because many of the high-grade Masons that were disciples of Madame Blavatsky, it metamorphosed into an organization that had Masonic origin, but that was separate by then from the Masonic order. And it was called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And its first chief, the formidable Scotsman MacGregor Matters, and various other people, and famous people and infamous people all joined it. It was quite a growing concern for a while among the ones who liked to be called infamous, because he enjoyed that role, even though nowadays he would not be called that. Was of course Edward Alistair Crowley, who and quite a few others, and quite a double membership in the Theosophical Society of Blavatsky. Blavatsky was still alive, in fact. And this needs to be remembered if somebody maligns the Golden Dawn to you. The Golden Dawn was the only esoteric organization by which something means, something that really concerns itself with deeper things, that Madame Blavatsky gave her pupils a permission to join. Members of her esoteric school were permitted to join the Golden Dawn. So now, of course, that the Golden Dawn also had inspired various things is true, including Crowley, who, if Aleister Crowley had lived in the 1960s, he would have been a minor guru, with sexual interests in Malibu. But he was born too early, born too soon. What can you do? But in any event, I can't go on. Otherwise, we will all fall asleep in our chairs or fall to the ground or whatever. But let us say the Golden Dawn in turn, which was a Masonic and Rosicrucian offshoot, became the principal source of the magical Western tradition. It was the one that introduced Tarot. It was the Tarot that introduced Kabbalah, because they were great admirers of Eliphas Levi, the early Kabbalist, and of all kinds of other occult practices, divination and so forth. And as such, it was an incredibly creative organization, out of which again came many strands, many filaments of magical, mystical interest, which are still with us in various ways, and which have enriched the spiritual life of people in the West and elsewhere too, immensely. So here, that in the Golden Dawn, we find the confluence of Freemasonry and the confluence of magic and all of the magical arts, but probably primarily the Rosicrucian mythos. And but the Rosicrucian influence itself also filtered into the Masonry proper. No? Masonic rituals and things like that one doesn't talk about, because we all have sworn an oath, not to talk about them. But let us say one of the interesting elements is that there are two divisions there are just many people belong to both in Freemasonry, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. Now, there were so many Rosicrucian-oriented people in the regular Masonic lodges themselves that they devised a special grade, which is the 18th degree Scottish Rite, Rose Croix, and the symbol and the emblem of which is the one in this book that we showed last time, the symbol of the rose on the cross, and the pelican who cuts his chest, and his seven little pelicans who are drinking his blood. This, of course, by the people of great Christian orientation, was taken to symbolize Jesus Christ, who gives his blood for his children. But let's say there are various other symbolic connotations that also can be found. And it's an absolutely beautiful picture, and I'm so glad that Manly Hall had it reproduced here. It is known as the 18th degree jewel, because in the various degrees people wear an emblem like a decoration, and the jewel of the 18th degree is this one with the pious pelicans who cuts his own veins to feed his children. Now here again there are, like all symbolism, it has all kinds of symbolic implications which we may look at further, but let us say the creative conjunction of Freemasonry and of the Rose Croix has produced very wonderful results, and one ought to pay attention to it. And inasmuch as I have grown so unhappily loquacious in the last two lectures. I promise you that I'll have it shorter one next time, but I will come back to these symbols at various times, because even though the people who devised and practiced with a lot of these symbols did not know that, their real message, their real magic is in their symbols. And this is true of the Rosy Cross. This is definitely true of Freemasonry. These are institutions of symbolic psychic transformation. And when they can have all kinds of other purposes as well, but it is a way for human beings to become one, as Jung wanted it, and to become more, to develop the great spiritual potencies of insight within them, and as such, I think, they have done a great deal of good. I could have gone into all the things as to why is there so much controversy about Freemasonry, and the time when a lying Frenchman came along and convinced an awful lot of people, including several cardinals in Rome, that the Freemasons were devil worshippers. And then, of course, that the Freemasons found ways to contradict that, so that's no longer said. But the Masons, particularly the Freemasons, had their troubles more than the Rosicrucians, because if somebody was looking for the Rosicrucians and wanted to hurt them, they couldn't find them. They were nowhere. You know, this is like the isn't there? There's a book, and then somebody took the title of the book and made a health food store out of it somewhere here. It's called Erewhon. Erewhon means nowhere. I can't think of the author for this. This is somewhat the Rosicrucians were Erewhon. You see them here, you see them there, you see them everywhere, you see them nowhere. And yet they made a mysterious and very powerful contribution, some of it by way of Freemasonry, to the occult world and to the philosophical world, and as such, this is an important step to observe. And I swear to you by the Rosy Cross that I will make it much shorter next time. Okay.